Hello and welcome to episode 26 of the Clacks Women for Indie podcast. Wasn't that a beautiful piece of music? It's Ross Bugden, copyright-free, royalty-free music from YouTube. Beautiful piece. I think we might be hearing more of that as this episode continues. We'll also be checking in again with Finn and family to find out how the social distancing diaries are getting on. And also a few updates on some things that are going on. Hope you enjoy. I'm recording this on Friday, and we've just heard on the news that Boris Johnson and Matt Hancock have both tested positive. This coming hard on the heels of Prince Charles's diagnosis the other day. And it's been quite interesting to observe the response. First of all, there's been outrage at the fact that they've been tested at all when all three of them are saying they've got very mild symptoms. I personally don't have such an issue with that because given their position of power and the number of people they're coming into contact with, I think we need to know that they're up for their duties as much as anything else. One of the symptoms of the virus can be confusion, and so I would like to know that the people in charge of us actually are in control of their faculties. And now that we know that they've been proved to be ill, I really don't think they should be doing their job even during self-isolation. But by the time this podcast goes out on Tuesday, who knows? Maybe we'll have Dominic Raab in charge, which will be interesting. Or even worse, maybe failing Grayling or, oh God, Priti Patel. Yes, anyway, the issue with Prince Charles in particular, not so much the being tested, it's the fact that he disregarded the instructions that all the rest of us are having to live by, which is do not travel, and if you're feeling unwell, isolate yourself. He did neither of those things, and according to the papers, him and 6 of his household have tested positive. And in the same breath, we read in the paper that Grampian's number of confirmed cases has doubled. Well, yes, it has. It's doubled by 7, Charles and his 6 households. So, these things do have consequences. But I think also it brings home just how fragile society in the United Kingdom is. This is the risk of recording this several days before the podcast goes out, because any of these things could have happened by the time it goes out. But just imagine if Charles, the heir to the throne, were to go down to this, the Queen, Prince Philip. I mean, the repercussions of that across the Commonwealth would be huge. Also, if we do end up being governed by failing Grayling and Priti Patel, I just can't imagine that civil unrest wouldn't ensue. That reminded me of a conversation that Leslie Riddick was having with Catherine Oddsdottir, I think it was, in the Iceland episode of the Nation films. And I'm just going to play you that little clip here because food for thought, folks.
The new Icelandic politics produced radical ways of thinking about how politics could be done, including revising the nation's very foundation of democracy, the Constitution.
You were one of the people that put together the crowdsourced Constitution, which has actually entrapped everybody, ensnared everybody's attention across the world. What was the reason for needing to do that?
Well, Iceland became independent in 1944. Let's start by Big Bang. We have Big Bang. No, but sorry, I have to explain. Because after that, we decided, okay, Danes were occupied by the Nazis, so we're just going to sneak away, because we've been trying for ages to get away, and finally we had a moment there. So we were doing that, and we said, okay, let's just have the constitution from Denmark, change the word king with president, and run. So we just voted on the 2 things. Do we want to be independent? Secondly, do we want this to be the constitution? And everybody was in agreement that this should only be a preliminary constitution.
We voted and ran. I like the sound of that. We have a preliminary constitution sitting on the stocks, the one that Dr. Mark McNaught drafted, which a lot of people, including myself, had some input into. Perhaps this would be a good time to dust it off and get some citizens' input into it. Something else I've come across this week. There is a free app which is a C19 COVID-19 Symptom Tracker, and it's been developed by King's College London, and the purpose of it is to help them with research. They're trying to understand the symptoms better, understand how fast it's spreading in different areas, identify high-risk areas of the country, who's most at risk. And all you do is you register on it, and then every day you go in and you just tell it how you're feeling, and they're equally interested if you're feeling absolutely fine. But if you've got any symptoms as well, then you can record those. So if anybody's interested in having a go at that, as I said, it's free. You can download it from wherever you get your apps from. I got mine from the Google Play Store, and it's called C19 COVID Symptom Tracker. It doesn't involve any testing or any diagnosing of anything. It's just you putting in how you're feeling every day.
Hello, podcast listeners. Just doing a recording from, I think, the 12T of social distancing, and just giving a wee update on things in the house. I wanted to start with the topic of the NHS and the celebration, and just the massive response last night at 8 o'clock with the cheers and the band beating and the clapping across Scotland for the NHS. I know a lot of people included carers and social care workers in that as well, which is absolutely right. But I think for me, where there's this celebration, a lot of the posts I've been seeing have been about the NHS workers and the state of play in Italy and China particularly. And just the different ways that countries are using their health services and valuing, I think, really comes down to it, valuing the staff members. And the quotes have been said about how the unskilled workers of a couple of weeks ago and the folk that were designated key workers but not on the scale that's now being appreciated is really coming to light. All the stuff referring to Brexit and Windrush, the xenophobia and the fallout from that of recruitment and division of families, and suddenly, things have changed, and folk actually being valued because they're actually, in many ways, they're not doing a different job from what they were doing before. It's just that the level of risk and the health risks out there to people, particularly with underlying conditions, has vastly escalated and really impacted daily life. And it's that interesting switch of valuing people for things that they were already doing, but it's the context has shifted, and many people, rightly, it's long overdue, because so many have recognised that there has been underfunding, underpaying, poor management, mismanagement, just a creaking ship under the weight of the responsibility and the duties that the NHS in particular is expected to dole out. And I would say people often have very unrealistic expectations of both NHS and social care. I've had mixed emotions the last few weeks and continue to have, and I expect to will continue to have, because I'm ex-NHS and I'm ex-social services professionally, and what this makes me think of is a couple of things. It's, what's my place in this? Should I be going back in? I came out for personal reasons and professional reasons, but I'm a very skilled worker, so I'm very good at what I do. So there's that guilt and pressure that I put myself to think, do I go back in there? But the thing for me is, I look at it and think, well, with the government that we have in the UK, did I expect the condition of the NHS and social services to improve? And the answer was no. So given that I was already struggling myself, and things did not look like they were going to get any better, and seeing the situation now, that really gives me the message to say there's not too much point going back in, because you'll break, and that's not any good to anybody. But also, fundamentally, the thing that I think has absolutely angered me to my core is that they don't have the right equipment. It's an absolute Health and Safety Act requirement that the employer has to have the appropriate kit in place for employees to carry out their duties. The first duty has to be to the staff to protect them, otherwise the whole mechanism fails. And that's what we're going to see, what we've already seen worldwide, is health staff, because you can't forget that health staff themselves have underlying health conditions, some diagnosed, some undiagnosed, who are already vulnerable without perhaps knowing it. And then they're put in situations where stress is one thing, and then the actual contagion is another. So without having the correct equipment to carry out their duties, it's just an appalling state of affairs, and should not be allowed to happen. But all those health workers and social care workers and care workers are in an absolute catch-22 situation. And I still have very close friends who work in the NHS. They've been amazing people to me, and I'd like to think that was reciprocated. But what I'm doing at the moment, partly to ameliorate my own feelings, but also just to reach out to them, is to try and support them in whatever ways that I can, from a distance obviously, to help get them through what is an unprecedented time for them. The people I'm particularly thinking of, I want to give a special mention to Neil and to Helen, who work down south, one of the health boards down south, who are amazing people in what they do professionally, and always committed to making life better for staff as well as patients, and really trying to promote quality of what's done over quantity. There's always a lot of talk about waiting lists and time to be seen, but essentially if you're not getting the quality of care, those waiting lists mean nothing. You might be seen by a physio within 8 weeks, but if that physio is pressured to then work with you too quickly and give you targets that aren't properly realistic in that time scale, then what was the point of it? Really, what was the point of that treatment if what's happening is that they then have to go and see the next person to keep up with some stats? Otherwise, somebody higher up will start screaming about. So those were existing pressures, but now we have a totally different ball game on top of that. And I think it was interesting to see that the Healthcare Professions Council had put out a joint statement just a couple of days ago, talking exactly about health staff that they cover being put in difficult situations. This is a body that oversees all those health professionals and holds them to account. So if there's anything complained about an individual's practice, then they will step in to investigate. So there's a lot of health professionals at the moment who are concerned about decisions being made, understandably, and want to know where they stand. It's quite a vague, overarching statement, as you might imagine, but it's just interesting to see that what they're emphasising is that they will take the context of the pandemic into account if any complaints are raised against staff in the future. But brings back to, I'm thinking a lot about the individuals that I know who are stuck in there at the moment, and that they then have to come home to their families, decontaminate, get their head round things before going straight back in. Anyway, on a lighter note, if indeed it is that, I wanted to address the "Does life feel normal?" quote, which from my excerpt last week, normal. Well, normal in this house is not necessarily normal elsewhere anyway. I work from home anyway, so now it's working from home plus the kids, and also husband in the house because his 3 different work streams have shut down. But I think I did not this time last week have an innate urge to punch Joe Wicks in the face if I ever meet him. But given that my traps won't actually let me lift my arms anymore, I'm going to guess that even if I did meet him, swinging a punch would be something of a no-go. We're also doing Cosmic Kids Yoga, which for anybody out there is generally for the younger kids, but it's quite cool. Yesterday we're going on a bear hunt with yoga poses, and the last doing it is not bad at all. So you could always give that a go. I would say adults, do it if it's just you, no kids, nothing to stop you doing it either. Bit of fun. The schedule, some successes, some lapses. So for example, right now I think we have scheduled, it might be break time, but I think we've scheduled my son's schoolwork at the moment. They take turns on the laptop to do their schoolwork literacy and numeracy each day, but I believe what they're doing right now is live streaming Chester Zoo in the background and building a fort. So, and they're still in the PJs. So, sometimes we're rolling with it and sometimes we're enforcing the schedule. I should mention that my kids, for whatever ungodly reason, go to bed at 10 and they get up at 7:30, and it doesn't matter what we do. That has been the case for several years now. There is no way that they will get more sleep. So that is them. So those hours have to be filled with either their own entertainment or us entertaining them, or obviously other devices. But we're definitely trying to all learn different things at the same time and give each other space to do that. But I think we are missing, obviously, the going outside, the visiting different places and responding to them. But, the situation feels at the moment like it's a sensible curbing of liberties, at least for the time being. And I would say that being very mindful of what legislation is going through at the moment. But our focus here is really just monitoring the kids, seeing how they're reacting to the changes, monitoring each other and being in contact with friends who we know ordinarily struggle. So really tapping in with them and just giving a check and opening the door and saying it's absolutely okay to get in contact, FaceTime, whatever, if you're just having a low point or you just don't know what to do, if there's just a lull and it just feels too much to cope with at this time. The other things we've noticed are obviously how often you can go out and get supplies and things, but we live just off a main road, so we would hear traffic all the time anyway, but that's definitely something that's subdued. There's far less traffic on the roads. It feels really good that way. I know people have mentioned the impacts on climate change on emissions. It's interesting with the normality situation. I read a quote this morning that said, in the rush to return to normal, we should use this time to consider which parts of normal are worth rushing back to. And I think this made me also consider that if in this house, if we were striving for normality right now, I think we'd find the loss more. And then this made me think about, well, those of us who support India and have done so for many years, in some ways this has prepared us for change, not perhaps the change that we were expecting, but we've had a readiness and a preparedness for change and for basically taking time to consider how do we want things to be in the future. And I think that quote resonates with that, but also our current situation where it is unprecedented, but we have been thinking about change and meaningful change for so long and actually had on the table ideas about, do we want to be like this? Do we want to try this idea? How would that look like in an independent Scotland? Really to be able to take those seedlings, if you like, and watch that grow into a more meaningful translation of what are the important things that we want to make as building blocks for our society. I think it's that question of what are we going to rush into. There's still obviously a lot of chat, particularly on Twitter, in that indie bubble that keeps going on about pushing for indie. I think it's just very personal and difficult at the moment for people to make sense of what for some is an absolute crusade, for some is a faith, and for others it's just a really pragmatic way of building a better life for the people that we share this country with. But I think that quote really resonated with me this morning. I will now hand you back to Fiona, who has some more interesting things to talk about, while I go and do something useful like nurse my thigh muscles, which, again, Joe Wicks, if you're out there, yeah, I'll be gunning for you, mate.
A bit earlier I mentioned Leslie Riddick. We love Leslie. We're fangirls. Because we can't have the march at Arbroath that we were going to have for the anniversary of the Declaration of Arbroath, Leslie has been working on a film about it, and she was talking about it on her podcast last week, and it just sounds wonderful. She filmed some of it at Bannockburn House, which is just along the road from us in Clackmannanshire, and I've actually spent a night in Bannockburn House with another of the Clacks wifeys stewarding at a ghost hunt, but that's a story for another day. What Leslie's done though, she's set up a Facebook group called Declaration Selfies, and what she's asking people to do, record yourself on your phone reciting one of the lines of the Declaration of Arbroath. And obviously there's the famous one about as long as 100 of us remain alive, but eventually she's wanting the whole thing to be covered, to be recited by Scots, and just been listening to them. And they're wonderful. I mean, this array of different voices speaking these words that are as relevant today in our current situation as they would have been at the time. I'm not sure how long it's up for. Hopefully it'll still be open for contributions by the time this podcast gets played. It's a public group, Declaration Selfies, and you just need to film yourself and post it. And what they're then going to do is choose which ones they like best, I guess, and so they covered the whole of the Declaration. When I was flicking through, I spotted a familiar face, so I'm going to play you the contribution from our mystery guest this week and see if you can place the name.
The Britons at first drove out, the Picts it utterly destroyed, and even though very often assailed by the Norwegians, the Danes and the English, it took possession of that home with many victories and untold efforts, and as the histories of old time bear witness, they have held it free of all servitude ever since.
So did you get it? That was Val Gold from Indie Live Radio. Beautifully done, Val. Fingers crossed you get picked to be on the film. Now we've got a plea from our friends at the Sar Alba Pipes and Drums, who, in the absence of the Arbroath March, are planning on a virtual celebration, so calling all pipers. If you want to take part in a historic virtual event, go to the Sar Alba Arbroath 2020 Facebook page and ask to join that new group. Then download a music sheet. Then you need to film a video in your house or garden, because of course we're all staying at home, playing Scots Wha Hae and Flower of Scotland. Then upload your video to your own personal social media page, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and then on the 6th of April at 1:20, share your video from your social media account to Sar Alba Pipes and Drums Arbroath 2020 Facebook page. That was probably a bit fast, but if you go onto the Sar Alba Arbroath 2020 Facebook page, you'll see all the instructions there. What a fantastic celebration to be part of, and they might keep you locked up in your houses, but they cannot stop you playing your pipes. And that was Sar Alba Pipes and Drums playing in Catalonia in September last year. Last week I gave you an update on the court case. You'll recall was the crowd-funded court case to test whether the Scottish Government had the right to carry out a referendum without having the Section 30 order. And at that time they decided to go ahead and serve the summons. What happened next was that the serving of that summons on the UK Government's Advocate General and also the Legal Counsel of the Scottish Government started a statutory 21-day clock, which would take us up until the 14th of April. Now, at the 14th of April, the summons would then be filed with the court, and at this point it would have been considered as formally being called in court, which starts a 7-day clock for the UK and the Scottish ministers to respond. Remember, this is an action on behalf of Scottish citizens. It's not being led by the government. Now, because of everything we know that's happening with COVID-19, the Scottish Government obviously is under incredible strain. They've been drafting legislation to deal with COVID, and what they've done is requested that the summons should not be filed at this stage until the COVID-19 crisis has abated. So there were 3 choices. One is we could continue with the action. It's a citizen's action. We can batter on with it if we want. The sheer volume of work that the Scottish Minister's legal team is involved in, it's entirely possible that they wouldn't be fully prepared to make their case, which could have a detrimental effect on what we're actually intending to achieve, which is to get a judgment that the Parliament can legislate within its own competence for a second referendum. The second option was to hold off filing the summons with the court and not have it called in court until the crisis has abated. This is the request that the Scottish Government have made. But the third option is what is known as sisting the action, and in that case what happens, we would effectively hit the pause button, but after the summons had been filed with the court. This means that as long as everybody agrees, we would file the court summons on the 14th of April as planned, but along with it an agreement between the parties of the case to put aside the 7-day time limit and sort of pause it, and generally the court will halt for a 3-month period. The decision to put the case on hold can be re-evaluated every 30 days, and any of the 3 parties to the case can restart the action by notifying the other 2 in writing of their intention to do so. Martin Keatings has been in touch with everybody who is part of the action and has asked us all to choose which of these 3 options we support. His recommendation is to go for the third one because it kind of keeps the pan on the cooker, albeit the heat isn't on underneath it. Personally, I think that's the right decision, so I've voted for that. But it remains to be seen what everybody else is going to go for. So we'll just need to wait and see, but nothing's going to be happening in April, that's for sure. So I'll let you know as soon as we hear any more about that, but I think it's going to go quiet, as is a lot of other things for the moment. One thing that won't be going quiet is the ongoing issues with the lockdown of businesses because of coronavirus and how on earth people are going to make ends meet during that period. One resource worth having a look at is Business for Scotland. Gordon McIntyre Kemp sends out regular emails. You get on his mailing list. He's just put out business update number 4 on Wednesday the 25th, which is coronavirus updates for business owners. And it has links to various council pages, also includes the new application form for the COVID-19 grant support. So really useful resource. There's a small business support grant of a one-off £10,000 if you've got a rateable value of less than 18,000. Or there's a £25,000 grant available for retail, hospitality, leisure support sector if you've got a rateable value between 18,000 and 60,000. I'm turning into a public information service. I hope that's useful to somebody. Okay, that's about it for this week. I must confess, it is getting a little bit challenging coming up with podcast content when we can't go out. However, we will keep on trying to do our very best. If anybody wants to be part of this podcast, you're very welcome to join in. All you have to do is send me a voice recording, just an MP3 file. If you want to do part of your diaries, what it's like, social distancing, or if you've got anything you want to share, or a poem, or anything you want to do, it'd be really good to have some input, especially if there's other Women for Indie out there. This is an open platform. If any of you would like to join in, you'd be very welcome. So you can get in touch with us through our Facebook page, which is Women for Independence Clackmannanshire, or on Twitter, which is @ClacksWifey, or on the hub, which is +ClacksWifey. So it'd be lovely to hear from people, and if nobody gets in touch, you'll just have to put up with me wittering on, but what can you do? Anyway, stay safe, everybody, and we'll hopefully talk to you all next time. I'm going to sign off with the full 2 minutes of that absolutely beautiful piece of music. After this, I'm going to go and look up what else that guy's done.